They say blood is thicker than water, but what happens when your own blood treats you like a stranger? For years, I thought my family would always have my back. But when I hit rock bottom, they didn't just turn away, they laughed. They cut me out, made me feel worthless, and acted like I didn't even exist. That's when I realized, sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most can betray you the deepest. But here's the thing. I wasn't going to stay broken forever. Because while they were busy tearing me down, I was planning the comeback they never saw coming. And when the moment finally arrived, my revenge didn't just hurt. It destroyed them. Growing up, I always believed family was everything. You know how it goes, Sunday dinners, birthday parties, Christmas mornings with too many gifts under the tree. That was supposed to be my life too. But instead, I was the kid sitting in the corner, trying to laugh along while secretly wondering why I never really fit in. See, my family wasn't poor, not by a long shot. They had money. My dad ran a small business that turned into a pretty big one, and my siblings? They got everything handed to them. Cars on their 16th birthdays, tuition fully covered, endless safety nets. Me? I was the odd one out. I had to work shifts at a diner just to afford community college. And every time I asked for help, it was brushed off with, well, you should have worked harder like your brother. It wasn't just about money, though. It was the way they looked at me, like I was less than. At family gatherings, my opinions didn't matter, my accomplishments didn't count. I could bring home a straight A report card, and it'd be ignored the second my sister mentioned she joined some new sorority. I was invisible, until they needed someone to blame or mock. The cracks got bigger as I got older. I wanted to believe things would change, that maybe once I graduated, landed a job, proved myself, they'd finally see me as part of the family. But deep down, I think I always knew the truth. To them, I was just the spare. The one they could overlook. And it all came to a breaking point the year I turned 25. That was the year when life hit me harder than I ever imagined, and instead of helping me up, my family made sure to kick me while I was already down. The year I turned 25 should have been a fresh start. I had just finished school, juggling late-night shifts at a greasy spoon diner with full-time classes, and finally, I'd landed my first real job. Nothing glamorous, just an entry-level position at a mid-sized marketing firm downtown. But to me, it was everything. It was proof that I could stand on my own 2 feet, without handouts, without anyone's pity. I was proud. For the first time in years, I could pay my bills without checking my bank account 3 times a day. I even managed to move into a tiny studio apartment, just 1 room, drafty windows, the kind of place where the radiator clanks all night long. But it was mine. It wasn't perfect, but it was independence. You'd think my family would be proud too. That maybe, just maybe, they'd finally look at me differently. But when I showed up to my cousin's wedding and told them about the job, the only response I got was a smirk from my older brother. Marketing? That's not a real career. You'll burn out in 6 months. My mom nodded in quiet agreement, as if she'd already written my story for me. That's the thing about entitled families, they measure your worth by how much you can make them look good. My brother's law degree. Golden child. My sister's sorority connections and her engagement to a surgeon. She could do no wrong. But me, busting my back to build something from scratch. It was invisible. At first, I tried to brush it off. I told myself, keep your head down. Work hard. Prove them wrong. And for a while, that worked. I kept climbing, taking on projects, staying late at the office, saying yes to every opportunity. But then, life blindsided me. One winter night, after leaving the office late, I got into a car accident. Black ice, a truck I didn't see in time, the kind of crash that spins your whole world upside down. I was lucky to be alive, but my car was totaled, my leg was fractured, and suddenly all that independence I had worked so hard for was hanging by a thread. Hospital bills piled up faster than I could blink. My job held my position for a while, but when the physical therapy dragged on, the calls from HR stopped sounding sympathetic. Rent was late. Groceries became a luxury. And in the middle of it all, I did the one thing I swore I'd never do again. I asked my family for help. I remember sitting at the dinner table one Sunday evening, my legs still in a brace, explaining everything. My voice was shaky, but I laid it all out. How the accident had wrecked my finances, how close I was to losing my apartment, how much I needed just a little support to get back on track. The room was silent for a second. Then my brother leaned back in his chair, folded his arms, and let out a laugh. "So, after all your independent speeches, you're finally admitting you can't make it on your own?" My sister chimed in with a fake sweet voice, "Maybe if you'd chosen a real career, you wouldn't be in this mess." Even my parents, the people I thought would at least have some sympathy, just sighed. My mom muttered something about choices and responsibility, while my dad told me he wasn't running a charity. I sat there frozen, staring at faces that looked like strangers. I wasn't asking for luxury, not for thousands of dollars, not for a free ride. Just enough to keep a roof over my head until I could stand again. But instead of lifting me up, they pushed me deeper into the mud. That night, I limped back to my apartment with a weight in my chest heavier than the brace on my leg. I cried, not because of the accident, not because of the money, but because I realized the people who were supposed to love me the most didn't care if I drowned. The betrayal wasn't loud, but it was brutal. It wasn't knives or screaming matches, it was silence, laughter, and a cold refusal to help. That cuts deeper than any blade ever could. From that point on, the line was drawn. They had made their choice. And slowly, quietly, I started making mine. Because if family could turn their backs when I was at my lowest, then I had every right to turn my back when it was time for them to fall. And trust me, fall, they would. When I walked out of that dinner with my family, something in me broke. Not the kind of break you heal from, like a bone that eventually knits itself back together. No, this was the kind of fracture that changes you. I realized in that moment I wasn't just on my own, I'd been on my own my whole life. I just hadn't wanted to admit it. But once the shock faded, reality came crashing down. Rent was overdue, my medical bills had gone to collections, and the company I'd worked so hard for sent me a neat little email, "We regret to inform you." My job was gone. Just like that. No backup plan. No safety net. The next few months were some of the darkest of my life. I sold what little I had, old furniture, the TV I'd saved up for, even my grandmother's watch, the one sentimental thing I swore I'd never part with. Every dollar went straight to survival. Ramen noodles became dinner, peanut butter sandwiches became breakfast and lunch. I skipped doctor's appointments just to stretch my cash a little further. Meanwhile, my family. They carried on like nothing happened. I'd scroll through social media and see them smiling on beach vacations, popping champagne at my sister's bridal shower, throwing money around like it was confetti. Not one phone call. Not one text to ask how I was doing. And then came the wedding. My sister's big day. I almost didn't go. Every bone in my body screamed at me to stay home, but a part of me thought, maybe if I show up, things will be different. Maybe if they see me, broken leg healed, still standing, they'll finally acknowledge me. I was wrong. From the second I arrived, I knew I didn't belong. Everyone else was dressed in designer suits and glittering gowns. I wore the only decent outfit I owned, one I'd bought years ago for job interviews. People looked me up and down like I was dirt under their shoes. My brother smirked when he saw me and whispered loud enough for me to hear, "Guess Goodwill's having a sale." At the reception, I sat at a table in the back, next to the coat rack, far from the family table where my parents, siblings, and relatives laughed and toasted. Nobody saved me a seat. Nobody asked me to dance. When the waiter came around with champagne, he skipped me. And when the $2,200 bill for the open bar landed on the family's table, my brother grabbed the slip, waved it around, and joked, "Don't worry, we'll put it on the spare siblings tab." After all, What else is he good for? The whole table roared with laughter. I laughed too, but not because it was funny. I laughed to keep from crying. I laughed because I realized they didn't just ignore me, they enjoyed humiliating me. And in that moment, while their glasses clinked and their fake smiles shined, something inside me hardened. I stopped wanting their approval. I stopped wanting their love. All I wanted was revenge. Not petty revenge. Not some childish prank. No, I wanted the kind of revenge that would make them regret every cruel word, every dismissive look, every time they pushed me aside. I wanted to take the pedestal they'd built for themselves and shatter it beneath their feet. But revenge, I knew, required patience. It required planning. It required me to become someone they'd never expect. So while they were busy drinking and dancing, I made a silent promise to myself: one day, they'd look at me not with laughter, not with pity, but with fear. And trust me, that day was coming. After my sister's wedding, I went home with a smile plastered on my face and a fire burning in my chest. They thought they'd humiliated me, but really, they'd lit the fuse. Every insult, every smirk, every laugh at my expense, it was all fuel. Still, reality didn't magically change overnight. My bank account was empty. Debt collectors blew up my phone. And I was still trying to walk with a limp that wouldn't completely go away. Revenge had to wait, because survival came first. I picked up whatever jobs I could, stocking shelves at a grocery store, driving deliveries for a food app, even cleaning offices after hours. I worked until my hands cracked, until my back screamed, until I could barely keep my eyes open. And still, somehow, it was never enough. Meanwhile, my family paraded their wealth and success louder than ever. My brother landed a promotion at his law firm, my sister's husband bought her a new Mercedes, and my parents threw dinner parties almost every weekend. They flaunted it all online, tagging each other, posting family goals, captions as if I didn't exist. But the part that cut the deepest? When my grandfather passed away. He wasn't perfect, but he was the only one who'd ever shown me kindness. When I was a kid, he'd slip me candy under the table at Sunday dinners, whispering, "Don't let your brother take this one." He'd taught me how to ride a bike, how to patch a tire, even how to cook scrambled eggs when I was too young to reach the stove. When he died, I thought maybe, just maybe, there'd be one last piece of him left for me. Something small. A watch, a book, a keepsake. But when the will was read, I wasn't even mentioned. My brother got his coin collection, my sister got his house on the lake, and I got nothing. I asked my mom about it, trying to keep my voice steady. She shrugged. Maybe he didn't think you deserved anything. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even sleep. I sat in my tiny apartment staring at the ceiling, feeling the bitterness spread through me like poison. That was the moment I stopped hoping for their love. That was the moment I knew I had to take control. I started watching them closely. I didn't reach out, but I paid attention. I learned their routines, their weaknesses, their blind spots. My brother. He was reckless with money, always chasing flashy investments and bragging about his business savvy. My sister. She was obsessed with appearances, desperate for validation from her rich in-laws and picture-perfect Instagram posts. My parents? They lived for status, for the illusion of a perfect family. And me? I was invisible to them. Which meant I could move in silence. It didn't happen all at once, but piece by piece, I began rebuilding myself. I saved every dollar I could, cut out every distraction, and focused on skills that would make me untouchable. Nights that used to be spent crying were now spent studying. Days I wasn't working, I was learning. Business. Investing. Networking. Everything they thought I wasn't capable of, I was teaching myself. I was becoming someone else, someone stronger, sharper, more dangerous. And while they thought I was barely surviving, I was quietly preparing. The first taste of victory came small. I landed a better job, one that actually paid enough to breathe. From there, I climbed. Promotions, side hustles, smart investments, I worked like a machine. Every setback became a stepping stone. And every success, no matter how small, I kept hidden from my family. Because my plan wasn't just to rise, it was to rise so high that when they finally looked down, they'd realize the ground had disappeared beneath them. But fate has a twisted sense of humor. Just as my life started turning around, theirs began to crack. My brother's flashy investments? They tanked. He'd been bragging for years about a can't-miss opportunity, pouring money into a startup he barely understood. When it collapsed, he lost a fortune. My sister's picture-perfect marriage? Not so perfect. Rumors started swirling that her husband was cheating, and the cracks in her Instagram-ready life were starting to show. Even my parents, who lived for hosting lavish dinner parties, suddenly had to scale back when their investments took a hit during a market dip. And where was I? Quietly thriving. I bought my first car outright, nothing fancy, but reliable. I upgraded to a nicer apartment. I built a savings account that actually had commas in it. And slowly, a thought kept circling in my mind, this is only the beginning. Still, the true revenge wasn't ready yet. I wanted them to feel what I felt. I wanted them to know what it was like to be dismissed, laughed at, made to feel small. And that required timing. That timing came sooner than I expected. It was at another family gathering, my parents' anniversary. The house was full of chatter, glasses clinking, the smell of expensive catering in the air. I hadn't planned to go, but something inside me told me it was time to make an appearance. When I walked in, all eyes turned. At first, I thought it was the same old judgment. But then I realized. I wasn't the same person anymore. I was healthier, sharper, dressed in a tailored suit I'd bought with my own money. Confidence radiated off me, and for the first time, they couldn't hide their surprise. My brother's smirk faltered. My sister's laugh sounded forced. Even my parents looked me up and down like they were trying to figure out who I'd become. I smiled, shook hands, made polite conversation. I let them believe I was just there to play nice. But inside, I was studying every crack in their armor, every weakness that was now exposed. Because the rising action wasn't just about me surviving anymore. It was about me preparing for the final act, the moment when the tables would finally turn. And as I left that night, their confused stares following me out the door, I knew one thing for sure. The climax was coming. And when it did, they'd never forget it. Walking out of my parents' anniversary party, I knew the game had changed. For the first time in my life, they weren't laughing. They weren't dismissing me. They were confused. And that confusion was power. But confusion wasn't enough. I wanted devastation. By this point, I'd spent years studying them, learning their habits, their weaknesses, the cracks in their perfect facades. And while they had been busy ignoring me, I'd been busy building something they never expected. See, all those nights I spent grinding at my side hustles, learning investments, teaching myself business. They'd paid off. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. Quietly, I'd built a small portfolio. Stocks. Real estate. Even a growing business of my own in digital marketing, something my brother once called a fake career. That fake career was now pulling in more money than he'd ever seen in a single paycheck. But I kept it all hidden. Because the best revenge doesn't scream. It whispers, until it's too late. The opportunity came knocking sooner than I expected. My brother's law firm hit a rough patch, partly because of his arrogance. He'd overextended himself financially, bragging about new properties, expensive vacations, and smart investments that were anything but. He was drowning, and though he'd never admit it, he needed help. And who do you think he called? Me. The same brother who laughed at me at that wedding, who made me the punchline of his jokes for years, suddenly dialed my number with a shaky voice. Hey. I heard you're doing okay for yourself. Think you could spot me a loan? Just temporary. You know, Family helps family, right? I almost laughed. Family helps family. Where was that philosophy when I was begging at their dinner table with a broken leg? Where was it when I was eating ramen for weeks, when I sold the only watch that reminded me of my grandfather? But instead of hanging up, I played along. I told him I'd think about it. Because I didn't want to just say no. I wanted to make him feel the same humiliation I once felt. So I invited him to meet me at my office. Not my old cubicle job. My office. He walked in wearing his expensive suit, but I could see the desperation in his eyes. The man who once looked down on me was suddenly scanning the room, realizing that my fake career had built something real. I sat across from him, calm, collected, while he stumbled through his pitch about why I should help him out. And when he finally stopped talking, I leaned back and said the words I knew would cut deepest. Sorry, I'm not running a charity. His face went pale. That line, the same one my dad once used on me, hit him like a punch. He tried to laugh it off, but the truth was written all over him. He was sinking, and I was the lifeboat he couldn't reach. That was the first strike. The second came with my sister. Her picture-perfect marriage had already started to crumble. Her husband, the surgeon, was a serial cheater. Everyone in town knew it, except her, or maybe she just pretended not to know. But appearances were everything to her, and she would rather live a lie than face the humiliation of the truth. I could have stayed out of it. I could have let her keep pretending. But revenge isn't about mercy. It's about exposure. So I made sure the truth came out. Not by shouting it, not by making a scene. No, I did it quietly, carefully, the same way they once whispered about me. A few screenshots forwarded to the right people. A few anonymous tips in the right inboxes. A discreet envelope delivered to her in-laws with undeniable proof of her husband's affairs. The fallout was nuclear. Her Instagram perfect life imploded overnight. The wedding photos, the vacation selfies, the couple goals, captions, all of it turned into fuel for gossip. Her husband left her, her in-laws turned cold, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't the golden child. She was the punchline. And me? I didn't even have to lift a finger publicly. She never knew where it came from. All she knew was that her carefully curated image shattered into a million pieces. The third strike was reserved for my parents. The ones who raised me to believe I was less than. The ones who let me sit at their table begging for help and laughed in my face. They lived for reputation, for the illusion of a perfect, successful family. So I made sure that illusion cracked. Remember that business I'd been quietly building? It was growing fast, attracting attention. Local media wanted to feature my story, how I went from broke, injured, and abandoned to running a successful company from scratch. I agreed to the interview, but only under one condition, that they highlight the fact that I did it all without help. When the article went live, it spread like wildfire. Headlines praised my resilience, my determination, my against all odds success. Strangers applauded me. Friends reached out in shock and pride. And my family? Their phones blew up with people asking why they were never mentioned. Because I hadn't given them credit. I hadn't even acknowledged them. And in a family obsessed with appearances, being erased was the ultimate insult. I could almost picture my mom clutching her pearls, my dad fuming that his name wasn't attached to my success, my siblings scrambling to explain why the one they ignored had outshined them all. But I wasn't done. No, the best part of revenge was yet to come. The article was only the spark. The real fire came after. Suddenly, I was being invited to conferences, networking events, even local TV. People wanted to hear my story, the black sheep who rose from nothing. And every time I stood on a stage or sat in front of a camera, I made sure to tell the truth, that I'd built everything without a penny of family support. My parents tried to spin it. They told neighbors and friends that of course they'd always been supportive. But the cracks showed fast. People had read my words, seen the interviews. They weren't buying the act anymore. And in a town where reputation was currency, my parents were bankrupt. It only got worse when my business grew beyond local fame. Investors started circling. Opportunities expanded. What started as a one-man operation turned into a thriving company with a team, clients across the country, and numbers my brother could only dream of. And then came the opportunity I'd been waiting for, the one that would pull every thread together. One of the biggest clients I landed was a high-profile case that needed legal consulting. They wanted recommendations for firms, and guess whose name showed up on the shortlist? My brother's firm. I nearly laughed out loud. The same brother who mocked me for years, who once told me marketing wasn't a real career, was now begging for contracts that my company had the power to approve. So I set up a meeting. I let him walk into my office again, only this time he wasn't asking for a loan, he was pitching for business. He came in with that fake confidence lawyers are so good at, but I saw the sweat beading on his forehead. He needed this deal badly. I sat through his presentation, nodding, smiling, letting him think maybe, just maybe, he had a chance. And when he was finished, I leaned forward and said softly, "You know, it's funny. Years ago, I asked for help and you laughed in my face. I begged for a seat at the table, and you shoved me into the shadows. And now, here you are, asking me for a lifeline." He stammered, tried to laugh it off, but his eyes gave him away. He knew. I slid the contract across the desk. It was blank. "I'd never trust my business with someone like you." Meeting's over. The look on his face as he packed up his papers, knowing he'd just lost the biggest deal his firm had seen in years, that was worth more than money. That was vindication. But I wasn't done yet. My sister was still scrambling to rebuild her image. Divorce papers were public now, and her social media accounts had gone quiet. She tried rebranding herself as a strong independent woman, but whispers followed her everywhere. She was desperate for a new angle, a way back into the spotlight. So when a women's empowerment event asked me to speak, and I saw her name listed as a co-speaker, I knew exactly what I had to do. On stage, I told my story raw, how I'd been ignored, dismissed, betrayed. How my own family had laughed at me when I needed them most. And though I never named names, everyone in the room could connect the dots. When I finished, the audience erupted in applause. My sister sat frozen in the front row, her face pale, her smile brittle. She couldn't clap. She couldn't move. Because for once, the spotlight wasn't on her. It was on me, and it burned her alive. As for my parents, their downfall came more slowly, but just as painfully. Their whole identity had been wrapped in their perfect children, their successful family. But with my brother losing clients, my sister's divorce splashed across town gossip, and me openly thriving without them, their mask cracked. At community events, people whispered behind their backs. At church, the pastor gave sermons about supporting those in need with a little too much pointed eye contact. Their friends stopped inviting them to dinners. Their social circle shrank, and for the first time in decades, they weren't the family everyone envied. They were the family everyone pitied. And pity, for people like them, is worse than hatred. But still, I saved the final blow. Because revenge isn't complete until you've taken back every ounce of power they stole. And I wasn't leaving anything unfinished. I thought watching my brother walk out of my office defeated would be the highlight. Or maybe seeing my sister shrink under the weight of my words on stage. But no, my final move was still waiting. Because the one thing my parents valued more than reputation was legacy. They'd built their lives around it, passing down the family name, making sure the community saw them as untouchable. Their money, their status, their so-called perfect family, it was their monument. And I was about to take a wrecking ball to it. When my company expanded, we needed a new headquarters. A big building. Something visible. And as fate would have it, one of the prime office spaces in town went up for sale, an old property owned by none other than my father's business partner. A place my parents had always dreamed of buying to pass down to their golden children. I bought it. In cash. But I didn't stop there. I put my name on it, literally. Bold letters across the front, MC's last name, Enterprises. The same name my parents once spat out in disappointment was now plastered in giant, gleaming letters on the building they never managed to claim. The ribbon-cutting ceremony drew cameras, press, city officials. Everyone was there, including my parents, standing off to the side, forced to smile while choking on the bitter reality that the child they'd cast aside now owned the dream they'd spent decades chasing. I walked up to the microphone that day, sunlight bouncing off the glass walls behind me, and said, "For years, I was told I didn't belong at the table. That I wasn't good enough. Today, I stand here not just as proof that they were wrong, but as proof that no one defines your worth except you." Applause roared through the crowd. Cameras flashed. My parents lowered their heads. But I wasn't done twisting the knife. As the event wrapped up, reporters swarmed for questions. One asked if my family had supported me through the years. I looked straight into the camera, smiled, and said, "No. They didn't. And that's exactly why I had to build everything on my own." Sometimes, the best thing someone can do for you, is show you how strong you can be without them. That clip went viral. Shared online, replayed on local news, dissected by bloggers. People cheered for me, rooted for me, held me up as an underdog who won. And my parents? They became the villains in the story, names whispered with pity, faces associated with cruelty and neglect. Their empire of pride collapsed in real time, and I didn't have to lift a finger. I just had to stand in the truth they tried so hard to bury. My brother avoided me after that. My sister unfollowed me on every platform, blocked my number. My parents sent a stiff, formal letter asking to reconnect, as if years of betrayal could be smoothed over with a handshake. I framed that letter and hung it in my office, not as a reminder of them, but as a trophy. Proof that the balance of power had shifted forever. And the sweetest part? I never raised my voice. I never begged for revenge. I just lived better, worked harder, and let success do the speaking for me. Because sometimes the loudest revenge isn't about screaming or fighting, it's about shining so bright that the people who once tried to dim your light are forced to watch from the shadows. That was the moment I knew, my revenge was complete. The building stood like a monument to everything they said I could never be. Every time I walked through those glass doors, past the letters of my name gleaming across the front, I felt the weight of every insult, every dismissive look, every laugh they once threw in my face, dissolve into nothing. Revenge, I learned, isn't about getting even, it's about getting ahead. And I had done just that. But what made it sweeter wasn't just my success. It was watching how time carved into the very people who tried to carve me out of their lives. My brother's career never recovered from the contract he lost. Word travels fast in professional circles, and losing out to me wasn't just embarrassing, it was damaging. Clients whispered about it. Other firms used it as leverage against him. Within a year, he was no longer the shining star of his firm but the cautionary tale whispered in corridors. He still practiced law, but the arrogance was gone. He couldn't walk into rooms with that smug grin anymore because everyone remembered the day he walked out of mine with nothing. I'd see him sometimes, standing in court or at community events, and he couldn't meet my eyes. Not because he hated me, but because he knew I had one. My sister. Her downfall was even messier. After her divorce, her social media empire never bounced back. Brands dropped her. Sponsors pulled out. She tried rebranding herself 3, 4, 5 times, each new persona more desperate than the last. Fitness coach. Travel influencer. Motivational speaker. But none of it stuck. People weren't interested anymore. They'd seen the cracks. They'd seen me on stage, telling the raw truth, and they knew her picture-perfect life had been just that, a picture. Eventually, her accounts went dark. She slipped into the background she once feared so much, forgotten by the very audience she used to command. And my parents? Their empire of reputation crumbled quietly, like a house eaten by termites. The invitations to community events stopped coming. Friends they once bragged to avoided them at grocery stores. Their church pew grew empty around them. And worst of all, the whispers didn't stop. Everyone knew their children weren't the golden legacy they'd paraded for years. Everyone knew the truth, that the child they dismissed was the one who rose higher than all of them. For people like my parents, that was worse than death. Living long enough to watch their pride turn to shame was the punishment I never had to lift a finger to deliver. But while they unraveled, I built. The company grew faster than I ever dreamed. What started as a scrappy idea in a tiny apartment became a brand recognized nationwide. I hired people who'd been overlooked like me, kids who came from broken homes, folks told they'd never make it. Watching them thrive under my roof, in a building with my name on it, gave me a satisfaction money couldn't buy. For the first time in my life, I felt seen. Not by my family, not by strangers, but by myself. I was proud of who I had become. And that pride didn't come from revenge alone, it came from survival. From choosing not to let their betrayal define me. From taking the ashes they left me in and building a fire so big it lit up the whole sky. One day, a letter came. This one wasn't stiff and formal like the first, it was handwritten. My mother's shaky script filled the page. She wrote about how she missed me. About how the family wasn't the same without me. About how my success made her proud, even though she'd never said those words before. I read it once. Then again. And for a brief second, a small part of me wondered if maybe this was what I had always wanted, acknowledgement. But then I remembered the years of silence. The way she turned her head when I begged for help. The way she and my father laughed at my dreams, dismissed my struggles, watched me fall and chose not to reach out a hand. No. That letter wasn't love. It was desperation. It was regret, but only because the world saw me now, and they couldn't hide from the truth anymore. So I folded it neatly, slid it back into the envelope, and tucked it into a drawer. Not out of bitterness. But as a reminder. A reminder that forgiveness isn't something you owe, it's something you choose. And I had chosen myself instead. Looking back now, I realize revenge wasn't just about watching them fall. It was about reclaiming the power they stole from me. About proving, not just to them but to myself, that I was worth more than their approval. Because the harsh truth is this, sometimes the people you expect to love you the most are the ones who tear you down the hardest. And if you let them, they'll convince you that you're nothing. But here's the secret, they don't get to decide that. You do. I decided I wasn't going to stay invisible. I decided I wasn't going to let their betrayal be the final chapter of my story. And once I made that choice, everything changed. Today, when I walk into that headquarters with my name across the front, I don't feel anger anymore. I don't feel bitterness. I feel freedom. Freedom from needing their approval. Freedom from carrying their rejection. Freedom from the idea that family is defined by blood alone. Family, I've learned, is who shows up for you. And sometimes, it's not the people you were born to. Sometimes, it's the people you choose. So if you're listening to this, and you've ever been laughed at, ignored, pushed aside by the very people who were supposed to lift you up, remember this, you don't need their permission to rise. Rise anyway. Because one day, your glow will haunt the very people who once tried to dim your light. And now I'll leave you with this. If the people who betrayed you showed up tomorrow, begging to be let back into your life, would you open the door, or would you finally realize you don't need them anymore?